Hey everyone, Ryan here, and in this video I'm going to go over how you guys can add a lot of life to your photos or your photo composites and your art pieces with cloth simulations or flowing fabric and whatnot. Now, to start things off, I'm going to show you the quick and easy way of doing things, and then I'm going to show you guys how you can do everything kind of yourself, which takes, of course, a lot more time, a lot more effort, but you have a little bit more control over the way you do things. So, of course, the quick and easy way is thanks to our sponsor, cghacks.com. So here we are on CGHacks, their website, and what CGHacks is it's a resource, an online resource for all kinds of different assets, high quality assets aimed for photographers that do stuff like what I do, cosplay photography, conceptual photography, and what they have is are their main bread and butter are their Photoshop overlays. So they have explosions, they have smoke, they have electro, mystic smoke, they have all kinds of cool things, and these are all like really cool assets that you can basically just drag and drop into your photos, and they usually work pretty good right out of the box without needing to do anything at all. But of course, you can always spend some time and adjust things and tweak things to make it look a little bit better or more tailored for your image. In this case, they also have something called capes overlays, which is just a bunch of renders of some like generic capes, no textures or anything, just generic red capes. But like they have some really cool, interesting compositions and flowing movement to them, and nice lighting. And these things work really, really well. So I'm going to show you guys how you can utilize these cape assets in case you want to do things the quick and easy way. So let's hop into Photoshop, and here's an image that I've made in the past using these cape assets. So I'm going to go ahead and just toggle off the capes for now, and you can kind of get an idea of what the image looks like without anything at all. So here's my subject. They're posed without wearing any kind of cape or shawl or anything like that. This is just what it looks like. And if I toggle on the capes, boom, way more just dynamic to the photo. It just has, in my opinion, just a lot more movement to it, a lot more visual interest to it. And this is about as easy as it gets to create something like this. So I'm just going to quickly kind of recreate this image using those cape assets. It's not going to look just like this because I'm probably going to pick a different asset that I used originally, but I'll show you the basic premise. So let's go ahead and go into this cape folder. I'm going to just toggle off all of these for now. And then you can see this is what the cape looked like originally. So, and what this folder is you can see it's just a bunch of different capes that I had dragged in. So here's one cape piece that I dragged in. Here's another that I dragged in. And I'm just going to do it from scratch right off the bat. Find something that looks interesting. I'm going to drag this one in, and I'm going to right click and flip horizontal. And let's just scale this thing down quite a bit more. Bring it behind our subject. And I'm going to even bring it behind the other cape. And again, Control T in Photoshop to bring up the transform tool, and I'm just going to start moving things around using the warp tool. And then, yeah, that looks pretty good. I'm going to make the other one probably a little bit larger as well. And again, clicking on the warp tool, I'm just going to kind of bring this up. All right, yeah, that looks pretty cool. I'm happy with that. And so now I put all of those capes into one folder. So I can toggle a folder on and off, and it's basically one layer. And then what I can do is, since I know this character has kind of a purple cape, hood, cloak thing, I want to make it purple, just like I did in the final image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add above that group that has all of the capes in it, I'm going to add an adjustment layer. Let me just delete all these ones. I'm going to add an adjustment layer. Let's try curves for now. And I'm going to drag that, make sure that's above, not in, but above that group that has all the cloth layers in it. And I'm going to hold Alt and click in between to clip the adjustment layer to the group. You can also right click that adjustment layer and click on, where is it at? Oh, there we go. Okay, create clipping mask. So click on the adjustment layer that's above the group, right click it, and click on create clipping mask. And what that does is it makes it so these adjustments of this adjustment layer only affect that layer or group that it's clipped to. So I'm going to just darken this down a bit since the cloth simulations are a little too bright right off the bat. That's looking good. And then I'm going to add a solid color. And again, we'll just hit OK for now. And then create a clipping mask on that solid color adjustment layer as well. So you can see it just adds a solid color over the whole thing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to sample the color of this character's hair. And let's just make it a little bit more saturated and hit OK. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set the blending mode of that solid color adjustment layer to something like multiply. And it's probably a little bit too dark right off the bat, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the brightness of this all the way up to 1 and then just drag it over, and we can start moving things around until we get a color that we really like. Now, in this case, multiply isn't quite giving me the effect that I want, so I'm going to hit cancel on that first. Actually, let's go back into there. Let's set it to purple. And let's set the blending mode of that to color. Yeah, that's looking much like what I was thinking of in my head. And so now, again, we can go in here and start adjusting the colors of this. Generally, you can go ahead and just leave it at 100% brightness, and just you want to just basically change the saturation of it. So if I bring it all the way to 0, the saturation is 0, but if I bring it all the way over to the right, it's fully saturated. We'll keep it fully saturated for now. Actually, maybe halfway, and hit OK. And then we can start adjusting that the curves adjustment layer that we had prior to that. Just start moving things around. Yeah, that's looking cool. I think this is a little too saturated, so I'm going to go in here. Oops. Go back in here on that adjustment layer and just bring the saturation down a bit. Something like that's looking pretty cool. Yeah, I'm happy with that. And that's basically it, guys. It's pretty simple. Now, what you could do is, what you can see is in the original photo that I did, if I toggle this on, you can see I also have something that's on top, just kind of going over like where the cape attached to the subject. All I did was simply just make a new group of cape assets on top of my subject layer, and just, I did the same thing. Warped it, straightened it, moved things around until it kind of looked like a piece of fabric that was wrapping over the shoulder of my subject. And then the same thing, just start adjusting the colors and the saturations, the levels. And what you could do is, you can go in here and start painting in highlights and stuff on the edges of the fabric. But that's essentially it. You just drag and drop the assets right in, change some colors, change the levels of it a bit, warp things around, and you got a pretty good and convincing cape or fabric or cloak or whatever it is that you're trying to add to your subject. Now, the con of this, as I mentioned earlier, there's the pros is it's quick and easy. The con is that you don't have a lot of control in the sense that it's just a solid color fabric. But what if your character has something that's a little bit more complex? What if it has an intricate pattern on it? Or what if it's not just a solid color but something like a jacket? So in this case, for example, this character here, this image isn't fully edited yet, but I'm going to go over the process of what I'm going to do in terms of adding a little bit more visual interest to the fabric simulation. So this character here, you can see that they're wearing a jacket, and the jacket has like all these little details on it, like straps and buckles and stuff, and it's not just a solid color, right? It's not just a solid blue. And what I want to do is I want to add a little bit more visual interest to this image by making it seem as if like the jacket was kind of flowing in the wind a bit. And so what I did was, if I go in here, let's just turn that off. What I'm going to do is first I'm going to prep my image. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to add a layer mask to the subject layer, and I'm just going to quickly paint away parts of the jacket that I'm going to replace with the simulation. So I'm just going to go in here, and this is going to be really quick and easy, guys. I would take way more time on this than I'm doing right now, but this just kind of gives you the idea of what I'm going to be doing. So I'm going in here, and I'm just erasing away parts of this fabric that doesn't need to be there or that's going to get replaced. Yeah, something like that works pretty good. Cool, great. So the lower portion of the jacket is missing. You know what? Actually, I'm going to go in here and delete a little bit more. And again, guys, if this is the image that you're going to be doing, spend a little bit more time on it. But for the video, I don't want to spend too much time. This isn't necessarily an editing tutorial. If you want to see my full process on that, I definitely have a video that you can check out. just go to my YouTube page and look at my other videos. My previous two are really long videos that I go over a lot of my process. So in the meantime though, I'm just gonna go over this jacket. So yeah, that's looking pretty cool. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and, I already cut them out from the background. They're just cut out on a transparent background. I'm gonna go ahead and save this image with transparency as a PNG, and I'll use that later inside of Blender to line things up. And then what you wanna do is you wanna get another photo of the clothing, at least for this technique that I'm talking about. You wanna get another photo of the clothing that person is wearing, or whatever piece of fabric it is that you're trying to add to your subject. So in this case, I'm trying to extend the jacket that this character is wearing, or that this person is wearing. So I just found an image of that jacket online. Ideally, you would want to take the image yourself, preferably, just have someone hold up the if it's something that they're already wearing in the photograph, after you're done with the photo shoot, just ask them to hold up that piece of cloth or fabric or jacket or whatever it is, as straight as possible, and just take some straight on photos of that in like flat, even lighting. Nothing that with like crazy lighting already. Just flat, even lighting is going to work best. In this case, I didn't do this photo shoot. This photo is one of my buddies. He took this photo, Anthony from Soul Studios, and he didn't take photos of the jacket. Luckily, I was able to find the name of this character and find like a picture of a jacket that you can buy. And I'm going to use this. So I've cut this out from the background already. And it's just, like I said, it has this transparent background. And I'm going to go ahead and save this PNG with transparency as well. And we're going to be bringing that into Blender. So let's go ahead and hop over in Blender, where I'm going to show you guys the not so quick and easy way of doing cloth simulations. So here we are inside of Blender. This is just my default startup project. And what I want to do right off the bat is I'm going to go ahead and press Shift A to add, or you can click on add at the top of your screen here. I'm going to click on image and mesh plane. And then I'm just going to navigate to where that image is that I saved it out. The image of the cloth that you cut out from the background and saved with transparency. And go ahead and hit OK. Now it's just a solid gray plane. I want to see the cloth on here, so I'm going to go up to my viewport settings up here at the top, click on this drop down, and if you are in the viewport shading, that's this third from the right orb at the top. Click on the drop down, and then under color, instead of material, click on texture. And now we can see the texture of that cloth cutout. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and line this up roughly with the size and position of this reference object that I have in here, and that's looking cool. I don't need this reference anymore, at least not for now, so I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. And so now we're going to go ahead and create a cloth simulation. So to do a cloth simulation, you just have to select the geometry. In this case, it's the plane, the mesh plane that I imported. Go over to the physics properties tab, that's this button down here, and click on cloth. Now go to the first frame of your simulation and hit spacebar or hit play, and it falls down because it has physics now. Let's go ahead and restart that, and let's restart our camera. And again, if I hit play, it just falls, right? There's gravity, but there's nothing else, and it's just a flat plane. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit more geometry to this, a little more details to the physical object, right? The 3D object. If I click on this and tab into edit mode, you're going to see that it's just one polygon. It's just one plane, right? There's no detail. If I try and move things around, it doesn't work because there's no details. So in edit mode, I'm going to go ahead and press Control R and add an edge loop right here. And I'm just going to cut it in half. And the reason I did that is because it's a rectangle, and I want to have even squares everywhere. It's not super important that you have that, but it's pretty important. So now that I have two squares, I'm going to go ahead and right click and just hit subdivide. And so you see it cut everything in halves, or divided everything by 2, right? So I had 2, and it cut each of those 2 squares into further smaller squares, right? So I'm going to do it again, and again, and again, and maybe one more time. Cool. And so now I just have a bunch of small squares. And so now if I hit spacebar again, the same thing happens. It just falls straight down. And that's because we don't have any physics to it, and it's not landing anywhere, right? So what I'm going to do is, first off, is I'm going to go into edit mode again. And before I do anything, I want to delete all of these transparent areas. Now, obviously, you can't see it, right? Because we save we save the texture out of Photoshop with transparency. So it is properly transparent wherever there's no texture. But as far as the physical simulation goes, those invisible areas still have mass to them and they'll intersect with each other. And we want to try and avoid that as much as possible. So we're just going to go into edit mode and we're just going to go ahead and start. Let me hide this camera. We're going to go ahead and start selecting all these areas that don't have anything. And you don't have to be too meticulous with this, especially if, if you have like really big areas of no detail. You can just, like I said, just get a lasso tool and just start grabbing these areas. You don't have to spend too much time on this. Okay, cool, great. And I'm just gonna press X or delete and delete the vertices, and then I have something that's a little bit more form-fitting to the shape of the clothing. And again, if I press spacebar, it's just gonna fall because there's nothing. So what I want to do is, when I want the simulation to run, I don't want it to just fall. I want it to kind of stay floating in place, but I still want it to have physics. So we need to add pin groups, essentially like you're pinning the fabric onto the wall or pinning on a clothespin or something like that. So in edit mode, I'm going to go ahead and select these vertices at the top. All right. And then we're going to go over to this green triangle icon on the properties tab bar here. This is the data properties tab. And we're going to add a vertex group. We're going to hit the plus sign, add a vertex group, and we're going to hit assign. Make sure we're in edit mode and we have those vertices selected. And we're going to hit assign. And so now these vertices that we selected are part of this vertex group. We can go ahead and get out of edit mode, click back on the plane or the cloth, go back to the cloth simulation tab, and then scroll all the way down to the bottom where it says shape, and under pin group, we're going to click on that, and we're just going to click on that group that we just created. So now, if I hit spacebar, it just stays there, floats in place. And you can even see it's got a little bit of movement to it, right? You can see it kind of looks like fabric, and it just restarted. So if I hit space again, boom, you can see how this cloth kind of moves. Now it looks a little blocky, and that's for two reasons. One, we don't have a lot of geometry. It's fairly low poly. But two, we need to shade smooth it. So let's just let this run again one more time. Cool, pause that. And if we click on the object, right click and hit shade smooth, now it just kind of smooths out all those little blockiness to it. So in terms of the density of your geometry, that's like how many polygons it's made up of, that directly affects the cloth simulation in two ways. One, the denser your geometry is, the longer it's going to take to calculate. It's going to be way slower. If you have a really dense mesh, a really dense plane, it's going to take a long time to calculate the movement of that cloth simulation. But you're also going to have way more detail because it's denser. It has way more information to work with. So you're going to have a lot more little small micro folds and little wrinkles and whatnot. Conversely, if your image or your 3D mesh has very low subdivisions, if it's low poly like we have here, what you're going to get is something that not only runs way faster, but it's going to look very different compared to something that's denser. It's not going to have as much detail. It's not going to have those small little folds and wrinkles that something of a higher polygon count will have. So you kind of have to figure out, well, one, what kind of fabric is it? Is it something that's really rigid, like a piece of leather? Or is it something that has tons of little details to it, like a piece of silk or something like that, right? Well, if it is something that's like a piece of silk, you're going to need a lot of detail, a lot of subdivisions, so it's going to take a very long time to calculate. So there's a trade-off. You got to figure out what you want and what your computer can handle. I have a powerful computer, and it still struggles with things that are really dense, at least in this program. In this case, this thing is something made out of probably like leather or denim, so it doesn't need to be too detailed. So now that we've set up the pin groups, we've set up the subdivisions of our mesh, and we've set up the cloth properties. Now what? What do we do now? Well, it's just sitting there because there's no forces, there's no wind or anything like that. It's just sitting here like a piece of fabric floating in the void, just doing nothing. Well, we want movement to it, right? Because like I said before, I want to make it seem like the jacket is just kind of flowing all around my subject, right? And getting some interesting movements. So what we can do is, let's make sure we're at the back of the beginning of our subject, or back at the beginning of our simulation. And we're going to press Shift A and add a force field. And what I'm going to add is wind. Now, this wind, it doesn't really matter where this little gizmo is. It applies this wind in the direction of where it's facing everywhere. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of aim this back a bit and forward a bit, something like this, just so the wind is blowing backwards away from the viewer, right? And I'm going to go ahead and hit spacebar, and nothing's probably going to happen because for some reason by default the wind modifiers or all the force modifiers in Blender are not even close to strong enough to affect anything in terms of cloth simulations. Now, that's partly due to how much a cloth weighs. Now, if you're in the cloth property, so click on your jacket or whatever it is that you're importing, and we're going to go to the cloth properties tab, or the cloth physics properties tab. We're going to see something that says vertex mass. This is the weight of each one of these little vertices of your mesh. The denser this is, the more vertices there are, the heavier it's going to be. So it's kind of a misleading slider. You know, if I turn up the mass of this, that might change drastically if I add one more level of subdivisions to this, because now it has double the amount of vertices or quadruple the amount of vertices that it had before. So now it has quadruple the amount of weight, even though I didn't change the vertex mass of this. So this is kind of an arbitrary number in most cases, so you just have to play around with it. But in this case, I'm going to leave it where it's at. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the cloth, and if you click on these this hamburger menu up top here, while you're in the cloth properties tab, you can click on presets, and these are just kind of like cloth presets. I'm going to click on denim, actually maybe even leather. And like I said before, it's kind of arbitrary, the settings, but I'm just going to click on a random one for a starting point. And again, if I hit spacebar, nothing happens because this wind is not strong enough. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the beginning of our simulation, and under strength, I'm going to set this to something like 10,000, something crazy high. And we're going to hit OK, and then hit spacebar. And you can see now the wind is blowing, right? It's blowing this piece of fabric as I would expect it to. It's blowing in the wind, just kind of oscillating back and forth throughout the wind. Now, nothing else is happening because the wind is going in one direction at one speed and it's not changing. We want wind to be like, you know, affecting the cloth, right? When you like see a piece of fabric blowing in the wind, right? It doesn't just blow in one direction, stay there, and not move, right? So we want to add some variations to this. What you could do, of course, is set like some keyframes of your wind object to like move here and then here, back and forth, left and right, up and down. And you could keyframe the strength of your wind to go up and down, how real life would work. Or I can do things a little bit easier and add a turbulence modifier or a turbulence force. So I'm going to go Shift A, force field, and add a turbulence. And again, just like the wind, this is not going to be strong enough at all to affect anything. So I'm going to set the strength of this to something like 10,000. And then I'm going to set the flow up to 10. And that just makes it so it turns it turns the forces of that turbulence into airflow. And then the size of this will greatly affect how the turbulence works. The size of a turbulence is how big the noise is. If the noise is really, really big, it's going to move things around in random areas in big swooping motions. If the size is set to something really, really small, like 0.01, you're going to have little tiny small granules bit of noise, which is going to move things on a smaller level, and you're going to get more small details in your movement. I'm just going to set this to 1 for now, and let's see what happens. I'm going to hit play and see if we get anything interesting in here. Okay, we're getting a little bit of variation. You can kind of see the cloth is moving around a bit more, but still not quite enough. Not what I want. So I'm going to make this the size maybe 0.5, maybe even 0.25, and I'm going to set the strength to something like maybe, let's try 50,000 for starters and see what that does. And yeah, it's blown around quite a bit more. We're getting some good details, but I want it to kind of be going left and right a bit more too. So I want even more details. So maybe I'm going to set the size back to maybe 0.5, and we're going to set the strength to something like maybe 90,000. Why not? Let's just see what happens with that. There we go. Okay, cool. So yeah, now we're getting a little bit more movement in this. Something a little bit more what I was hoping for. I don't want to blow towards the camera that much, so I am going to turn up the strength of the wind as well. We'll set this from 10,000 to maybe like 40,000. Go back to the beginning and hit play. and just see what we got going on here. Okay, that's pretty cool. I like that. Yeah, that's something more along the lines of what I was hoping for. Exactly. But again, you can see here, the cloth sim, it looks like it's like a piece of, I don't know. Well, I guess it does look like a piece of leather, right? But I want it to have a little bit more detail in it. So I'm going to go back to the beginning. I'm going to go and edit into edit mode. And I'm going to add one more layer of subdivisions to this. And in fact, just to save time, I already know that this upper portion of the fabric is going to be hidden behind my subject. I'm not going to see it at all. So I'm going to just subdivide these lower areas because that's all we're going to see. So that's all that I care about in terms of detail. I'm going to go back to the beginning and hit play. And because it's a denser mesh and it has more subdivisions, like I said before, it's going to take longer to calculate. You can already tell here it's taking way longer for it to think. So you just kind of have to think of what can your computer handle, or be cognizant of what your computer can handle. In this case, it's still looking a little too stiff, and that might be due to the fact that I selected a leather preset. So I'm going to go back to the beginning. In my cloth physics properties tab, I'm going to click on that hamburger menu at the top, and I'm just going to do cotton. Let's try that. And let's see if it operates a little bit differently. Yeah, definitely. Way better, for sure. You can already see all the smaller details in the fabric. It's just looking way better. And now that I'm looking at this, I think it looks a little too detailed. So the presets definitely make a huge difference. So make sure you're clicking on a preset as a starting point that is appropriate. In this case, I'm going to go back into edit mode, and with those vertices that I just subdivided selected, I'm going to click here at the top of the screen so that I'm on face selection mode, which is 1, 2, or 3 on your keyboard. So up here at the top, face selection mode, and those faces are still selected. I'm going to right click and do unsubdivide. That's not always a good practice to do, but in this case it worked. So now I'm going to go back to the beginning and hit play, and oh yeah, it's moving fast, it's looking good, and I'm getting tons of interesting movement to this. This might even be a little too violent, so I'm going to go back to the beginning, go to turbulence, and set this to like, I'm going to make the size a little bit bigger, and I'm going to turn the strength down from 90,000 to maybe like 70,000. And let's just see what this is looking like. Okay, let's set the size to maybe like 3. Let's see what that does, the size of the turbulence. Okay, I'm liking that. I think that the wind could be turned down a bit. Let's make that like 45,000. And let's turn the turbulence up to like a size of, or down to like a size of like maybe 1.5. Okay, cool. Let's see how this will look. I'll go back to the beginning, hit play again. I want a little bit more turbulence now. So as you can see, guys, something like this, it's very hands-on, and it's a lot of iterations, a lot of changing small parameters here and there, hitting reset, play, see how it looks. You're not satisfied with it, so you go back, change something else, you go back and forth between this parameter, this setting, and that setting. But that's basically it. You're just going back and forth between a bunch of different settings and densities, and you're just trying to figure out what looks good for what you're trying to go for. Now, because of this, because I'm adding this to an image that I already have, I want to bring that image into here so I can use that as kind of a placeholder, not a placeholder, but a reference of what I want everything to look like. So I'm going to click on my camera. Let's turn that back on. I'm going to go to my camera, set this to 50 millimeters because that's what the original image was shot at. I'm going to click on background image, add image, and open. And I'm going to select the image of my cutout, my subject cutout that I saved out of Photoshop. I'm going to go into my camera, set this to full screen, and under the background images, I'm going to set this to front, opacity 100%, and boom, we have this in here. Now I want to start moving my camera around to kind of match the perspective of the original image. Not that it matters too much because we're just adding a flowing piece of fabric, but I want to get a good ballpark figure. Something like that. Yeah, that's close enough. That's good enough. Yeah, I'm going with that. And let's actually, let's back up a little bit. There we go. That's looking good. Cool. Great. Fantastic. Now what? Now while we're in the camera view, I'm just going to click on that cloth again. Right, well, you don't need to do that, but I'm going to go back to the beginning and hit play and just let the fabric simulation run its course and see what's going on. So in this case, as you can see, the fabric's kind of flowing directly behind my subject where I can't really see anything. So I'm going to probably go in this wind and just turn it to the left a little bit and have it blow to the left of, or camera left of my screen. Hit play, go back to the beginning, hit play, and just kind of see what we got going on. Now, maybe you don't want it blowing to the left, maybe you do want it blowing back, but you want to see what's going on. So I can always offset my image a bit, going back into the image, the background image tab of my camera, and just offset this to the left and right. And just let's see what we got going on. And it's looking alright, but again, not quite what I want. So I am actually going to zero this back out, and I'm going to take the wind and just crank it all the way to the left, quite a bit more. I'm going to go to the top view, turn it to the left, go to the front view, something like that. Okay, cool. Go ahead and hit play. Yeah, there we go. That's the kind of motion I was looking for. You know, just making it look like that the jacket is kind of blowing in the back. Maybe not so far to the back though. So let's go ahead and turn the wind. Let's make it a little bit more horizontal, coming from the side. Hit play. Okay, we're getting there, but not quite what I want. I'm going to just play around with the size of the turbulence a bit more, and we're just going to keep going and see until we get something that we like. At this point, you guys have basically seen everything that I'm doing in terms of the cloth simulation. I'm just balancing the different settings of the wind, the turbulence, the directions of the wind and turbulence, the weight of the cloth, the different presets of the cloth, but the setup is already done. What you see me do is the setup, and so now it's just a balancing act. Keep tweaking things until you like things. Do you want it more detailed? Do you want it less detailed? Do you want it more rigid or less rigid? Do you want it going left and right? More turbulence or less turbulence? It's not a quick and easy process. It takes a long time, and if you don't have a powerful computer, it's even harder because you have to try and wait for the cloth simulation to run its course. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and just start playing around with settings, and I'm just going to fast forward through this so you guys aren't watching me back and forth, because you've already seen the process. So at this point, just hang tight until I get something that I like. Okay, cool. So we're back now. I've got something that I think is a little bit more of what I was hoping for in my head. So I'm going to go back and reset this offset. And so what do you do now? Now you have the simulation, and at some point in the simulation, you find something that you like. Well, what you want to do is, let's just hop out of the camera view. What you want to do is you want to bake this simulation. What that does is it basically makes it so that the simulation doesn't need to be recalculated again. It knows everything. It knows where it's at. So I'm going to click on that simulation, go to the physics properties tab, and then under the cloth simulation, scroll all the way down to the bottom under cache, and then go down and click on bake all dynamics. And it's going to basically resimulate everything again, writing that information to your computer. Once it's done, it might take a while, might take 5 minutes, might take 20 minutes, who knows. It just depends on how detailed the simulation is and how powerful your computer is. Mine just finished, so now I can just toggle back or I can just scrub along the timeline here anywhere, and it just knows where it's at. So I'm going to go back into here, and I'm going to find that frame that I really liked. So go back to camera, go back to the offset, move this over a little bit, and let's just find that frame that I thought was interesting. I think something like that looked pretty cool. I like that. So frame 203. Now what I want to do is I basically want to make it. I want to save this frame. I want to bake in this information onto the plane. Before I do that, actually, you might notice here, if I zoom in here, you might see a little bit more, like a little bit of jagged edges and whatnot. Now, of course, that's due to the subdivisions that you may or may not have on your simulation. But let's just say you want to smooth out these little jagged bits on your fabric. but you don't want to recalculate the cloth simulation, and you also don't want to add more details. Maybe you like the way the fabric looks, you just want to smooth out some of these edges. Well, with that object selected, click on the wrench, which is the modifiers tab, and then click on add modifier, generate subdivision surface, and make sure this is after the cloth modifier. And that just smooths things out. If I zoom in here, look right here, I'm going to toggle this on and off. This is off, and this is on. Looking right here around this fold, this fabric, if I turn it off, all these jagged edges. If I turn it on, it's just a little bit more smooth, and you can turn up to maybe 2. Cool, that looks great. But back to the simulation. So frame 203 is what we like. We don't care about anything else. So I'm going to go to frame 203. And before I do anything, I'm going to duplicate this because I want to keep a backup of this in case I want to use other frames from this simulation. So I'm going to press, with the selected, Shift-D to duplicate, and just right-click to just drop it in place. And so now you can see here in the outliner, we have 2 copies. I'm going to turn off that backup and click on this original one again. And then what I want to do is I want to apply this cloth simulation. So this was the cloth properties that we added. If we go to the modifiers tab, we can see a modifier that says cloth. If we click on this drop down, we can apply. I'm going to hit apply. Now, it doesn't matter where we scrub on the timeline, it's not moving. It's stuck in place. This is how this object looks now. And I can move things around, I can rotate it, move it around. Now, you might have some weird issues with like rotations and moving and stuff like that and scaling, because it's scaling from the origin point. And the origin point is just floating off somewhere that's not at the object. So I'm just going to right click, set origin, center of mass. And so now it just is it's just in the center of this object. So it just behaves a little bit better and a little bit easier. I'm going to go back to my camera view. I'm going to click on the camera. I'm going to click on the background image of my camera. And I'm going to zero out that offset again so my subject is where they're supposed to be. And now I can take this object and I can start maneuvering it around. Just like I was doing with those photo assets in Photoshop, only I'm doing it on the 3D model itself. So I can get something that looks a little bit more towards what I want. So I think this looks pretty cool. We'll see if, yeah, maybe the jacket's kind of flowing backwards, or then maybe we'll have it kind of halfway down a bit, something like that. And we can scale. And because this is an object that's baked in all the information of the cloth, I can go in edit mode and start moving things around. Now if I turn on proportional editing, that's this button at the top, if I click on something, press G to move, you can see it starts moving things with a soft fall off. And if I use my middle mouse, it affects how big that fall off is. So I'm going to start moving things around here, move this up here a bit more. These parts right here, I want them hidden behind my subject. I want maybe the hand to not be fully occluded by the fabric, so I'm just going to kind of move things around a bit. And so this way I have the general shape of the cloth simulation that I did, but now I can go in here and just kind of get a little more granular control over everything. And if I tab out, yeah, that's looking pretty cool. Actually, it might be a little too big, so I'm going to scale it down a bit, move it up a bit. Yeah, that's looking a little bit more natural. Cool. Yeah, I'm liking how that looks. Now, of course, I can go ahead and turn on that backup copy that we made that still has the physics simulation, and I could. Actually, you can see here it's kind of glitching out. This copy that I made doesn't have the baked-in cache. So what I would need to do is I would need to go back to the beginning, click on that copy that we just made, go back to the physics properties tab, scroll down, and click on Bake All Dynamics again. In this case, I'm not going to do that just to save time, but this is what you would need to do with each new copy. You just bake out that physics simulation again, and then reapply the physics modifier or the cloth modifier, and just keep rinse, washing, and repeating until you get what you want. I'm gonna go ahead and disable this for now, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna click on this copy that I just made, or that I have, and I'm gonna copy this one, Shift D to duplicate, and so now I have another copy of this one that's already baked out, and I'm just gonna reuse this one. I think I can get away with using it as long as I move things around. So I'm going to go in here, start moving things around in edit mode. until I get some interesting movement to my fabric. Yeah, something like that. That looks pretty cool. Yeah, I'm happy with that. So I just basically recycled the cloth sim that I already baked out and that I applied the cloth modifier to. And you can't even tell that it's a different piece of cloth. So this is where we want to now dial in our lighting and our material. So this is basically where the payoff is for doing the long process. Before, the quick and dirty one was using a pre-made cloth asset from cghacks.com. This is where we can start really dialing things in. So like I said before, the other one is just a solid fabric, and it's got the lighting that was already made for the simulation, and it works for a lot of cases. But in this case, one, we have a cloth simulation that's more dialed into what we want, but two, we have the textures of the fabric that we set up, which is the jacket, and three, we can make the lighting fit exactly how we want to. If we have some super unique lighting in our photograph, we can match that same lighting in 3D on our cloth sim. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and split this window and open up the shader editor, right? And then we're going to go ahead and click on this cloth. Let's get it out of camera mode. And what I want to do is I want to go to our render preview mode. So I'm going to click on this at the top right of our screen, the viewport shading. I'm going to click on rendered. And it's probably going to look something like this, where it's just black. And I have a transparent background set up. If you want to see how I set up my project file so that I have a transparent background, go ahead and check out one of my previous tutorials where I show how to set up Blender for using this kind of stuff. In this case, yeah, I just have a transparent background and it's all black. There's nothing. If I turn up the brightness of my background, you can now see that these things are brighter, right? I'm going to keep it black for now. Actually, I'm just going to turn up a little bit, so there's just a little bit of detail. And I'm going to go ahead and add a light. So Shift A, light, point light. And it's going to probably be way down here, as yes it is. I'm going to drag it up. And you can see here we have a light in our scene. Right? It's just lighting up our scene. Let's go ahead and let's turn the brightness of this up for one. So I'm going to turn up the light, brightness, and then I'm going to make the light a little bit bigger because right now it's infinitely small and I want some softer shadows. So I'm going to make the light a little bit bigger and just start moving the light around until we get something. So I'm not going to dial in the lighting just yet. I want to dial in the materials a little bit first. So right now, if we click on this object, we can see that the material is just, we have the color, right? We have the fabric color, the designs, the patterns, but the fabric itself still looks like a sheet of plastic or something, right? So we want to modify that. And what we could do is, if we click on the object, and with the shader, the shader editor tab open up over here, we can take a look at what our material looks like. So we can see we have the principal BDSF material node, and then we have the image of our jacket, and that's going into the base color of our material, which is giving the color. And then we have the alpha. If we shift click the alpha, Control Shift left click the alpha, we can preview what it looks like. And this is just basically saying what's transparent and what's not. And this is saved from Photoshop. So let's go back to looking at the material. So we want to keep the alpha connected and we want to keep the color connected. But what we want is we want to adjust, one, the roughness of our material. So if I turn this roughness slider up and down, you can just see that it makes the material altogether more rough or more detailed. Let's keep it, like a little more than midway for now. And what we want to do is we want to add some small like micro details to the fabric itself, because right now it's just flat everywhere. But what we can do is we can take the details from the image and create fake detail out of that. So what we're going to do is we're going to press Shift A in the shader editor and add a bump node. We're going to feed the color from our jacket image into the height of our bump node, and then feed the normal output of the bump node into the normal input of our material. And now we can see we got just tons of detail. Now this is way too strong and the details are way too big. So what we're going to do is first is we're going to click on this bump node. We're going to set the distance to something like maybe 0.1. That's a little bit better, but it's still a little too strong. Now up here, I'm not too worried about up here because this is going to be hidden behind our subject anyway. The parts that are going to be visible is all I'm worried about, and that's down here. Now right here, it's probably way too detailed still, so the strength slider is what we're going to use to adjust that. And so if we just bring this all the way down to 0 and then slowly bring it back up again, we can just bring it back up until we get a little bit of details. And so now we have a little more interest. It looks like kind of the surface of some rough fabric and whatnot. So that's looking a lot better. Now what we want is some variation in our roughness. And we can use that same image, this image cut out, feed the color of that into the roughness of our principal BDSF. And we do have some variations, but everything's way too shiny, so we can adjust that. So I'm going to go ahead and press Shift A and add a color ramp node. So type in color ramp and hit enter. And I'm going to go ahead and just drag this in between on this line that's going into the roughness. So you can see how the lines kind of highlight. I'm going to drag it so that the roughness one highlights, and it just automatically plugs this in between. And so now I can go ahead and adjust the roughness of this image based on these sliders right here. So anything that's black is going to be fully rough. Sorry, anything that's black is going to be fully shiny, and anything that's white is going to be 100% rough. If I Control Shift left click on this with the Node Wrangler enabled, make sure you have that add-on enabled pretty much all the time. Control Shift left click on that color ramp, we can get a preview of what our roughness looks like. We want most of it to be rough and little bits of it to be black, because I want it, or close to black. So I'm going to go ahead and drag the slider up like this, and then yeah, something like this. Now obviously the edges are pure black, but those are transparent, so we don't care about that. That's okay. Let's go back and Control Shift left click on the principal BDSF node and see what we're working with here. So it's still way too shiny, so I'm going to bring this in a little bit more. And then on the black slider here, we're going to click on that little black one, and then click on here and just make this color something that's not black, maybe something that's, yeah, something that will look like a darker gray. There we go. And so now we got something that looks a little bit more like, I'm imagining that the fabric is supposed to be something like denim, like either a super worn denim or maybe even leather. I'm not 100% sure, but this is looking a little bit more like what I imagine in my head. And again, we can play around with different values. If you want, you can also go to the specular tab on the principal BDSF node and just turn the specular up or down, and that just basically says like how much of it is shiny. And I don't want it shiny everywhere. It is cloth. This is looking pretty good. Okay, cool. So with this one image node of the jacket, we fed it into the bump node, which gave it some detail, and then we fed it into a color ramp going into the roughness, which gives it some variation on the roughness of the texture. And then at this point, you could also, if you wanted to, let's just say that the image that you brought into Photoshop looks a little bit wrong in terms of color, you could always add a hue and saturation or any other kind of adjustment node and, change things. You could turn up the saturation a bit. I'm just going to leave it where it's at for now, though. And I'm going to go ahead and minimize this window. I'm going to go back into my camera view. And what I want to do is, now that the lighting is, or that the material set up, I want to get the lighting to kind of more closely match my original photograph. So in this photograph, if we actually go back to Photoshop and let's look at the original image, we can see here that they're on a white seamless backdrop, and we can see just off camera to the left there's a strip box here, which is probably the most powerful lighting source hitting our subject from the side, the camera left. And then we might have like a soft box above camera that we can't see lighting up from the top a little bit. And then we also have this kind of a red-orange light on the camera right side, filling in some of the rim light shadows on the camera right of our subject. So these are the kind of lighting conditions that I want to try and replicate. So first I'm going to set up the ambient lighting, which is going to be like the overall lighting. No directions to it. So going back into here, go back into Blender. Let's turn off our overlays for now. Let's turn off our point light for now. And let's just go back to our world settings. So I'm going to set the color of this to white, and then the strength to 0. And I'm going to bring that strength up slowly, just so I can see that like the ambient lighting kind of matches the ambient lighting of my image here in Photoshop. So you can actually see here where the light's not hitting too much directly, you can still see a little bit of details in the fabric. So it's not pure black. There's a little bit of bounce lighting going on in our scene. So I'm going back into Blender. I'm going to kind of replicate that. Maybe darken it just a little bit more. Maybe let's try 0.2. Now I want to add those 2 or 3 other main light sources. So the first one, let's just do the point light. And let's turn our overlays back on. And let's just start moving this light around. So right now you can kind of see that the light is in front. If I go to the side view, you can see the light is kind of in front of the fabric. Here's the camera, here's the fabric. But if you look at the photograph, the light's a little bit behind our subject. So the light should come from more behind. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this light, and just from the side view, I'm just going to bring it behind a little bit, and then let's go back into our camera, and there we go. We got something that looks a little bit more like our original image. So I think this is still far too shiny. So I'm going to turn the roughness up a bit, and then I'm going to turn the specular level down so it's not as shiny everywhere. There we go. Looks a little bit more like cloth. And what I'm comparing that to, if you click on your camera, just click on this, unlock this icon right here, so that way you can zoom in and zoom out without moving your camera. So if I zoom in, what I'm doing is I want to compare this part of the fabric that's cloth to this part of the fabric that's also cloth. So, you know, this shoulder pad is probably like a pleather or a leather, so it's a little bit more shiny, and the rest of it's not as shiny, more like a diffused cloth material. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this, and I'm going to try and match those two elements. So I think the bump is way too strong. We turn that back to 0, and then just slowly bring it up to like maybe 0.3 looks all right. And then we're going to turn this IOR level down at the specular even more. All right, that's looking all right. That's looking pretty close. It doesn't have to be perfect. So let's go back into our full screen, and let's just start moving this light around until we get something that looks like what we want. Again, it doesn't have to match perfectly. It's more important that you get it to look good, or how you want it to look. I think we can make this light source a little bit bigger. And a little bit brighter. Yeah, something like that looks good. I'm going to duplicate that light and bring it over to the right side, and then just try and get a little bit more light on there. No, I think that's way too strong. I'm looking at this right piece right here. So let's toggle this light on and off. Yeah, just a little bit of detail looks good. Maybe the brightness down to 200. And then now I want to replicate that last prominent light, which is that orange light. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this light source. Get out of the camera, go to the top view, and since it comes from more of the right side of our subject, I'm going to bring it over here, kind of in front a little bit, and then go back to camera view. I'm going to turn this down in size, and then let's go ahead and set the color of that. So the color of this light, click on here, and eyedropper, and I'm just going to sample some of the colors from the original image. So maybe the parts of the sword that's silver looks good. Let's turn the brightness up all the way, and then yeah, here we go. Now, the issue that we have here is that, well, one, I think the light's way too bright. But more importantly, and also the color's a little off, so I'm going to make this a little bit more orange. So what we have here is a couple issues. One, the light's too bright. Two, I think that the light should only be hitting kind of like a couple feet in front of our subject, and right now it's spreading out everywhere. So if I turn this into spotlight mode and then just turn this sideways, you can see here we have the light with more of a directional point to it. So I'm going to make it so it's not hitting this right jacket so much. Something like that. And then another issue we have is that this light, this orange light that we have on the right, isn't having any shadows casting onto the fabric. So this fabric right here, like for example this part of the fabric, more specifically this part of the fabric, shouldn't be actually receiving any orange light because there should be a person in front of the fabric there that we don't have in 3D. So now that I think about it, if I go back to this original image, let's go back to it in Photoshop. There's actually not a lot of orange light hitting our clothing here. Maybe a little bit on this metal zipper here. But if we look at the actual fabric itself, aside from those little metal bits, the cloth itself seems to be fairly evenly lit from from all directions except for this more prominent camera left direction. So I might even just ignore that orange light altogether because the actual cloth in our fabric is ignoring that as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete that last light. And now we got something like this. This looks pretty good. I'm happy with the way this looks. I think the lighting looks great, and I think the shape of it looks all right. So I'm going to go ahead and say this is my final look for the cloth. If I go ahead and disable overlays, this is what it looks like now. This is the image. So what I want to do is I want to save this out and bring it into Photoshop. So I'm just going to go back to my my render settings. I'm just going to confirm the resolution, which it does match my Photoshop document. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger though, 200%, but it still maintains the same size. Render settings I already have set up. Again, my previous videos go over render settings and everything. Transparent, yes. Everything looks great. So now I'm just going to go ahead and hit render and render image. And it should just take a few seconds, a few minutes, whatever. But it's going to go ahead and render out the custom cloth simulation with that fabric setup and the lighting that I have set up. And it should be done here any second now. Boom, we're done. Here we go. Here we go. If I zoom in, we can see now we have this. We have the cloth sim saved out exactly, and it has a little bit more tailored lighting that's more dialed in towards the actual photograph, and we have these textures on it that look a little bit more like the original one compared to just a flat texture. So we want to save this out now. So I'm just going to go up to image, save as. I'm going to navigate to where my project is. PNG, RGBA, make sure it has that transparency. Color depth is fine, and we'll call this cloth sim 01 and hit OK. Cool. Great. Now that's just going to save out. So we're going to go back into Photoshop. Let's go ahead and look at our original image. And then let's go ahead and bring in that render. All right, I'm going to drag it into Photoshop and hit OK. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this behind my subject layers. And I'm going to turn my shadow layer back on for the ground. And then, oh, you know what? For some reason it dragged in unevenly. So I'm going to go back, drag that back in again into here. And okay, yeah, that's looking, it's lined up perfectly fine, but you can see here that parts of the image is like, it seems shifted. So let me go back into Blender real quick and see what went wrong. If I turn this overlay back on, oh, I see what it is. It's not that it's misaligned, it's that when I erased away parts of this image, I erased away too much. So I'm going to put that back behind my subject. And then on the subject layer, I'm just going to go ahead and add that part of the layer mask back in. Okay, great, cool. So now we have our cloth sim in Blender or inside of Photoshop. And what you could do is, of course, you can go in here, and if you're like, I don't like the way it looks completely, you can press Control T and go, of course, enable the warp simulation and or the warp tool, and just start warping things around a little bit more if you want to. We're going to go ahead and leave that how it is. And now what we want to do is we want to further match the colors of our cloth simulation with the real cloth that's already there. So if I zoom in here, right, I can see, well, here's the cloth sim, right, and then we have like the real cloth right here on our subject. So I'm going to click on our subject. I'm going to use the lasso tool, and I'm going to just lasso select this section of the fabric, and I'm trying to get like an evenly lit area that has shadows and highlights. I'm probably going to even add to the selection, holding shift, I'm going to add to the selection this part of the sleeve here. And I'm making sure that I'm getting all the shadows and the highlights of this cloth. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to press Control C and Control V and copy it. And so now you can see here, I just have these two little patches cut out. Now, those patches aren't going to be kept, but they are going to be referenced. So if I let's look back at this part of the jacket. You can see here that the colors of my CG jacket, the 3D, are a little more blue, and this has a little bit more of like a kind of a purple magenta color cast to it. Let's see if we can automate the matching of that. So I'm going to click on the cloth sim. I'm going to go up to image, image, adjustments, and well, match colors grayed out because we need to rasterize this layer because it's a smart object. So I'm going to right click the cloth object and click on rasterize layer, and now it's no longer a smart object. Now we're going to go back up to image, adjustments, match color. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the source, and that's going to be the Photoshop document that we're in currently. And then the layer, it's going to be that layer that we duplicate or that we copy and pasted from the jacket. And that's called layer 1 in this case. So under layer, I'm going to click on layer 1, and then I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And so now you're going to see that over here, if I undo and redo, you're going to see that the cloth just kind of matches a little bit better. And you know what? This sometimes works and this sometimes doesn't. It works decently for this area over here, but if you're looking over here, not so much. It kind of loses that. So what we're going to do a different method instead. What we're going to do is above the cloth sim, we're going to add a curves adjustment layer, and we're going to clip it to the cloth sim. Again, by alt clicking in between the two layers, or you can right click the curves adjustment layer and click on create clipping mask, and making sure that it's above the layer that you want to clip it to. Now on this curve simulation, we're going to click on this icon here that's part of the curves layer, not the layer mask, which is to the right, but the left side, this little graph icon. And then under the properties for that curves adjustment layer, we're going to click on hold alt or option and click on auto. And that's going to bring up this little box here. And what we're going to do is we're going to click on find dark and light colors. And then what we're going to do is we're going to click on shadows here, which is going to bring this box up. And we're going to just eyedrop a dark color of our fabric that's part of the photograph. And what it's going to do is it's going to sample that dark area and map that dark area to the darkest parts of our layer that the adjustment layer is affecting, which is the CG, the computer graphic or the computer generated image. So I'm thinking one of these darker areas like that looks good. Hit OK. And then the biggest change is going to happen when you click on the highlights tab. What we want to do is now we want to sample the brightest part of that fabric from the original source, which is going to be this area of the sleeve over here probably. Not this shinier part, because that's a different piece of fabric altogether. I'm looking at the fabric that's being replicated in 3D, and that's the more of the cloth portion. So I'm going to click on that around there. Yeah, something like that looks pretty good. Maybe a little less saturated. And I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And save as default. I'm just going to click no. So now this part of the fabric is much more closely matching this part of the fabric over here. Now the issue is over here on the right side of the screen, it doesn't match because this piece of the clothing has a little bit more of an orange color cast to it due to that light that's over there in real life. So what I could do is I could just create another curves adjustment layer and do that process again for the right side. In fact, that's what I'm going to go ahead and do. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate that curves layer, reclip it to the CG, to the capes, and then clicking on that graph symbol, holding Alt and clicking on Auto. I'm going to do that same process again, but just sampling this portion of our photo. So find dark and light colors, click on dark, sample this dark area right here. That's looking good. And then click on highlights and sample the brightest part of that fabric. Something like that. I think it's a little too dark still, so maybe we'll bring up the brightness. And you know what? I'm just not getting a result that I want. It's not quite looking like how I was hoping for. So I'm gonna hit cancel. I'm gonna delete that adjustment layer, and I'm just gonna do it manually. So I'm gonna create one more adjustment layer above the cape CG layer, and we're gonna set that to color balance maybe, and we're gonna clip it as we have been. Oh, I clipped it to the wrong layer, so I'm gonna bring that above the curves layer and clip that. And then we're just going to add a little bit more magenta in here. We're just going to eyeball it. So under the properties for that adjustment layer, under midtones are alright. We're going to start there. I'm just going to add a little bit more magenta into this. And then let's take away some of the blues by adding some yellow, maybe a little bit more green. Yeah, something like that looks pretty good. All right, cool. Super small adjustment, but that's being applied everywhere. We only want it to be applied over here. So I'm gonna go ahead and click on the layer mask of that color balance layer. Press Control or Command I to invert it, and then I'm gonna press B for the brush tool. And then with that layer mask selected, making sure my flow's all the way up, I'm just gonna paint white on that area right here, and that'll just make it so that adjustment layer is only affecting this portion of the fabric. Cool. And now, of course, our original image has like, some film grain to it, some photo grain, and our CG has none. So we want to try and match those two elements. So with the CG selected, I'm going to go up to Filter, and let's go Noise and Add Noise. We're going to set this to monochromatic. Gaussian is fine, and let's set the amount to let's see what 1% looks like. I think that's still too much. So maybe even like 0.3%. Let's try 0.5. 0.5%. That's looking better. I'm gonna hit OK. So now the noise of the grain on this CG matches a little bit more with the original photograph. Now, of course, at this point, I want to go into the layer mask of my original subject layer, and I want to clean things up a bit more. So right now we can see a bit of the original backdrop here still. So I can go ahead and just delete that. And another issue that you might come across is fringing. So you can see how there's like around the edges of my subject layer, there's like kind of this white edge, and that's the feathered, softer edge where the white background is kind of showing through. We want to kind of get rid of that, and we could just paint it out manually by like going around the borders here and painting that out, but that might take a long time, and that's not always the best case. See, we also have it over here too, just around the borders of the fingers. We have like this small little edge, and we call that fringing. Well, what we can do is very quickly is let's control click on the thumbnail of our cutout. That's this right here. And if this was a layer mask, you can control click on the layer mask itself to select that as well. But I already have this on a new layer, and I've already applied the layer mask. So I'm going to control click on that thumbnail of the subject layer, and it just makes that selection again. Now what I want to go is up to select and click on inverse, and that's going to invert the selection. So now it's selecting everything except for our subject. And now what I can do is I can go up to select, modify, and grow or expand. And I'm going to expand that selection by, let's just say 2 pixels. Hit OK. If I press Control or Command H, it's going to hide those little marching lines of the selection. I still have the selection enabled, I just don't see it. So if I press Control H again, you'll see it. And so now what I can do is I can click on the layer mask of that subject layer, and with my brush selected and black, I can go ahead and just paint black on these areas. And because I only have that 2 pixel edge selected everywhere, it's only going to erase away that area where I have that 2 pixel selection around the borders. Now in some of this area it's a little too much, but that's fine. You can go back in and fix those edges later. Right now I'm just showing you how to very quickly deal with fringing. So, a little too much came off over there, but that's okay. Let's see if we have any fringing over here. A little bit, so I'm going to go ahead and just erase away those bits here. We got some fringing here, some fringing there. Let's go back to this area over here. You can see a lot of fringing around this area, so I'm going to go ahead and just erase away. And you see that fringing just disappears really quickly. You might need to go in and adjust the size of that contraction that you made earlier, or that expansion. Or you might need to just go in with the brush tool afterward and adjust some of those edges. But that's looking pretty decent. I like the way that looks. I'm going to press Control D to deselect everything. So now I can just go in here and fix certain areas. But just like that, boom. I now have, I went from this cutout, or this, we're only looking at the jacket. We went from this jacket, where it's just kind of falling down around our subject, to something with a little bit more dynamic and movement to it. And because we did it from scratch inside of Blender, we were able to have the clothing texture, we were able to customize the lighting a little bit more, and things just look a lot better. But again, if your character is just wearing a red cape or a black cape or a simple fabric, or maybe the pattern isn't that important, and you want to just do something very quickly, something like this, then I would suggest checking out cghacks.com and checking out their capes asset because it's very quick, it's very easy, and if it's a simple solid color like this, you can get a very quick look done in a fraction of the time. So yeah, that's basically it for this video. It's not a full editing tutorial, it's just more of a technique tutorial. If you want to see my full editing process for a lot of my other stuff, check out my last two videos. They're really, really long. They're like 3-4 hours long, and they pretty much go over everything. It's kind of me just blabbering on for a couple hours about who knows what. It's not very organized, but I do have chapter markers, so you can kind of try and follow along. But yeah, I hope this video helps. I hope you learned something. I hope you guys can try and add some cool cloth simulations to your subjects, or maybe check out the CG Hacks, our sponsor, and see what they got. They have a bunch of other really cool overlays, and I will create videos on all those overlays in the future, as well as alternate solutions to do it yourself inside of Blender. Because it's always good to know if you don't have the money to buy certain things. Sometimes I don't have the money to buy assets, and I want to just do it myself. At that point, you have to ask yourself, what's worth more? Is your time worth more than your money, or is your money worth more than your time? So if you got a lot of time on your hands and you want to do things yourself, you can, like I just showed you here. Or if you don't have a lot of time on your hands, but you have some extra money, you can go ahead and quickly buy some assets and get some stuff done a lot faster. But yeah, guys, hope that video helped, and I'll see you in the next one.